Hello, everyone, and welcome to another interview on the NARSA podcast. It's been quite a wee while. I think this is probably about 3 years since I did the last interview. It's Gary here again, and I'm your host for today. And I'm delighted, absolutely thrilled to be joined by former Rangers chairman and a key component of Rangers Revolution back in the mid to late 1980s, Mr. David Holmes, and his co-writer for his book, Unveils, Stephen Halliday. It's taken a wee while to get us round the table here, gentlemen, and I'm delighted that you persevered. I'm delighted that Lynn helped us persevere to get to the point where we get a chance to chat and cover the book and your journey on the book as well. So I'm really looking forward to today's chat. So just from an introduction and background perspective, David, can you tell us a bit about your background and your journey to how you became the chairman of Rangers Football Club, please?
Okay, anyway, nice to meet you, sir. It's been a long time, but we've now got a connection in Canada. Really important. How did I get? One of the big questions that always had to be answered, I never got a chance to answer it, and I waited 34 years to answer it, was how did David Holmes ever become chairman of Glasgow Rangers? It's a long story, and I'm going to cut it a bit shorter. I started life in Bonnybridge, a wee village outside Falkirk. And when I was 15, I could not wait to leave school. I'd had enough of school. And the quickest day I could get out, that was the one that I wanted. I just did not get on very well with school. I liked a couple of things in school. I liked the gym teacher, who was Bobby Brown, an ex-Rangers goalkeeper.
Yeah.
And there was a woodwork teacher called Old Jock. And he introduced me to the desire to become a joiner. So when I left school, I became a joiner. And the question now is, okay, well, how did a 15-year-old apprentice joiner become chairman of the Rangers? And that's a fascinating story. When I took up the apprenticeship, I wanted to finish the 5-year apprenticeship. And that meant I had to get leave of absence from the national service at that time. So instead of going in at 18, I wanted to serve my whole 5 years. So I did that. But to get that in place, I had to sign declaration that I would go to further education classes, which did not go down very well at the time, I've got to say. Anyway, I enrolled for night school. I went to night school. And after maybe first 3 or 4 weeks, I was just sitting there wondering, I wasn't at the dancing, but I was sitting listening to somebody talking again. But then the penny dropped, because the lecturer that night was talking about something that I'd actually been involved in during the day as my apprenticeship. And he was telling me the theory behind what I'd been doing practically. And for some reason, the penny dropped, and I really got hooked on. So by the time I'd finished my apprenticeship, I had a higher national certificate in building. And I just couldn't believe that I had come that far, and I had got really absorbed in this, and I wanted more. But anyway, it came to finish the apprenticeship, and I had to go and get an examination, and they put me in the RAF. I was taken down to Cadnington in England, gave me a uniform, and sent me up to Wilmslow, which is just outside Manchester, to do square bashing, 8 weeks. So after 10 weeks, they then put me on a boat to go out to Singapore. And I'm thinking to myself, I'd hardly been out of Scotland, and now I'm going away to the other side of the world. And I thought, wow, that's going to be difficult. Anyway, I eventually got to Singapore. The first thing I found out was that I got a trial for the station team. And I got into the station team, and oh, that was it. And I went from there, and I played for the Singapore RAF team and the campaign services team. And then I managed to get into the Singapore state team, and I played against some of the big teams coming back from the Melbourne Olympics in Australia. And I just had a great time. But I found something else out in Singapore. I found me. And I found what I wanted to do in life. Professional football player.
Yeah.
Those things I wanted. So during the close season in Singapore, I enrolled in the education department in RAF Changi. I took 2 higher in English and maths. And I came back home after 2 years. And I got a job in the design team in Bryson, a big concrete company. And I finished my education in, it was the old Glasgow Technical College, which is now Strathclyde University, and I got a BSc with honours. And then I discovered to be a teacher. So I went to Jordan Hill and did some teacher training. And I became a teacher, and I taught for 8 years in Falkirk. And I found in my life there was still something missing. I wanted more. I wanted to run something. I wanted to be in the building industry. And out the blue, I found out there was a journal that had a government legislation. All companies had to do training, and they were all looking for training officers. So the launch organisation were looking for a training officer. So I applied for the job, and I got it. But that didn't mean anything to me because it was John Lawrence that was the chairman of the Rangers. Apart from, as a Falkirk supporter, I was still anti-Rangers at that particular time, I've got to say. And I had a brother who was an absolute out-and-out blue nose. I mean, and we had some real discussions in the house. I still don't talk to him, I've got to say that. But anyway, I joined the Rangers, well, the Lawrence organisation in 1968 as a training officer. And I found out that it was they paid a lip service to being a training officer. I go and look after the apprentices. The management don't need training. How wrong they could be. Anyway, I did that for 6 or 7 months, and nobody was interested. So I reorganised all the apprenticeship training, and I was lucky because at that time decimalisation was coming in, metrication and standardisation, and the whole building industry was going to have to rechange or rethink how they worked. So I became the number one man telling everybody what to do. So I enjoyed that for a while. And in 71, I was never too aware of Rangers. It was never came into the office, as it were. In 71, in January the 2nd, the disaster took place in Ibrox. And there was a real dampener on the whole organisation. I didn't realise how deep it was inside the Lawrence organisation. And then you come to terms with how it had struck us. As a supporter of football, it was a disaster, and we were all upset. But Rangers were really getting hammered. And Mr. Lawrence retired. He was over 80 at that time. And Lawrence Marlborough took over as the chairman. And he and Willie Wardle got together at that time, and they decided that Rangers should have a new stadium away from the big bowl construction, which was a liability, and it was an accident waiting to happen.
Mhm.
And so the two of them got together, and Lawrence brought me into it at that time to be the go-between them and the architects and make sure everything was going and he was getting what he wanted. So he joined the board of Rangers in 73. And by 76, it took a long, long time to get all the permissions. But in 76, they unveiled their new plans. And it was going to be a magnificent stadium. And 78, they started the stadium. And in 78, Rangers won the treble under Jock Wallace for the second time in 3 years.
Yeah.
And everything went according to plan. By 81, the three stands were built, and it was a magnificent stadium. Then, when you look round about it, was 12,500 and 13,000 average attendances at Ibrox. And they weren't playing for first or second anymore, it was for fourth and fifth, because Dundee United, Aberdeen, and Celtic were there in the first three places. And Rangers Lawrence was getting an awful lot of criticism for having spent so much money building this new stadium instead of looking after the pitch. And him and Willie were really upset by it. So Walker left. And they appointed John Gregg at the time. And came 83, and Lawrence had had enough of the criticism. He was fed up with it. He was fed up with living in the fishbowl of Glasgow. So he said to me one day, I'm going to immigrate to America with my family. He said, I've had enough of this. He said, the only problem I've got is, he said, I've got two problems. I need to find out how I can the company here from America and Rangers. And I said, well, don't make Rangers a problem. He said, how do you mean? I said, well, sell your shares. Get the money for them and leave it behind. He said, no, I cannot do that. He said, I'm a Blue Nose, David, and I'm not walking away from Rangers Football Club. I said, well, what do you think? I said, well, if you're not walking away, I said, you can't leave it like that with 30%. I said, you'll have to try and get over 50%. Then you can do what you want with Rangers. He said, that's a good idea. So he was, at that time, well down the road for moving to America. Just getting worse. And start of 85, he had finalised all his arrangements to become a tax exile in April 85. The Jack Gillespie was one of the other directors, and he had 22%. And we had made an agreement in principle to buy his 22% to put us over the 50%. And it was not finalised in April. So he said to me, look, I was the go-to man at that stage. You know, he used to buy new companies. You buy a bogie with no wheels. So he bought the bogies with no wheels, and I put the wheels on.
Yeah.
He came in one day and he said, I've got a new company. I said, what's that? He said, it's Taggers. I said, what do they do? He said, they sell cars. I said, what the hell do we want to sell cars? He says, I think it'll be a great company. I said, okay. He said, I want you going to the board meeting tomorrow and see what we've bought. I said, it's a bloody liability once I'd been there. I said, so that's two liabilities you've now bought. He said, well, you go and sort it then. So I got, but anyway, we came back to Rangers and he left. And what really got him about what had happened at Rangers was he was criticised for building the new stadium. But his idea was the new stadium was showing the structure and the place that Rangers held in the hierarchy of football, not just in Scotland, all over the world, Rangers. But they had a stadium now that was probably one of the best in the world, and nobody wanted to come.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to come because what was on the park was not happening. So he said, look, you finish the negotiations and get us over the 50%. So I did that in November of that year. In November, we had the 50%, and we had to go and buy the rest of the share or offer the rest of the shareholders. It was one shares, and we were buying them for £12.50. So that all took place, and we finished up with 66% of the. And he came over. He was only allowed 2 weeks in the country, so he came over and he announced that he had become the leading shareholder. And so a couple of days before he was going to go back to America, he says, he came into the office and he said, look, we're going to go for lunch today. I said, well, I don't go for lunch. I said, I've got plenty to do in here. He says, no, we're going to go for lunch. So we went for lunch to the Ibrox club. And during lunch, he said, yeah, I've been interested in football. And I said, yeah. I says, Betty and I are shareholders at Falkirk, and we've got season tickets there. No, he says, I'm talking about football. I said, well, they play football. He says, no, I was thinking more about Rangers. I said, no, I never thought about that, no. He said, well, you remember when we started this 5-year plan, you said to me, if you're going to buy it, put somebody that's going to root it out and get it sorted out for you. He says, I said, yeah, I did say that. He says, well, I've got my man. I said, great. That's exactly what you've got to do. He says, well, it's you. I says, no. I says, Lawrence, I work 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock at night, 5 days a week. I've got to see my family sometime, and it's usually the weekends. So what am I going to do is come and take on Rangers at weekends. I says, no, I can't do that. He says, well, I'm not going to give it to him else. He says, you're the man. I said, well, I think talk to my family. So I went home and talked to Lynn and Betty, and they agreed. And I hope this came across in the book, but they agreed we'd take it as a family.
Yeah.
And so every weekend we'd be together, and that's how it would be. So I told him that the next day, and he said, that's okay with me. He says, you run it whatever way you want. So he gave us, Betty and I, the tickets for every home game. I went to every home game to have a look at what was going on. And I came back and he said, what do you think? I says, well, you brought another liability in at the company. He said, well, what are you going to do? I says, well, I'm going to make a business plan. I said, you know, they don't have a business plan. He says, oh, they must have a business. I said, well, either they're hiding it or I can't bloody find it, but they've not got a business plan. They just wait and see what's going to happen. Anyway, at that particular stage, I was being totally ignored by the rest of the board. And every new idea I wanted to bring in, oh no, and I got outvoted 6-1 all the time.
Yeah.
So I said to Lawrence, it's very difficult. He said, well, hang on, have a look and see what's going to happen. Anyway, over Christmas and New Year, 3 games, 3 defeats. Hearts and Rangers and Celtic, and it was absolute rubbish. So early in January, just like you and I are talking, you've got a time and I've got a time here. Well, we had the same when he was in San Francisco area. So he used to, when he got up in the morning, he used to phone, and before I went home at night, we had the phone call. We used to. So he said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well," I said, "because it's not going to work." He says, "Why?" I says, "Because I just got outvoted." He says, "Well, what do you want?" I said, "Look, Lawrence, you cannot run anything like this, Rangers, with a committee." I says, "Because committees don't work, especially committees, and they all think they're millionaires and they've all got to have their own say." I says, "It just didn't work." He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I says, "Well, you said to me, going to do the usual." I said, "Well, my usual is, because we've been burnt lights before," I says, "is clearing all the bad things out and then bringing in all the new things and things that'll work." He says, "Well, do it." I says, "Well, Leslie," he says, "what's that?" I says, "One voice, mine, nobody else's." He says, "I'll never interfere." I says, "It's not your voice I'm worried about." I says, "I've got to have control of the 66% of the shares, and I get to vote on them, and nobody else gets to vote on them." Because John Payne was chairman of Rangers at the time, but he was also on the main board that I was sitting on with the Lawrence Group and Taggart. So he says, "Well, okay, you've got it." I says, "But it's not as easy as that." I says, "I'll need to put money to," because he said, "Well, we're going to have a board meeting in February in Paris." It's because he couldn't come back in again to Britain. So we went to Paris, and it came to Rangers in the board meeting. And John Payne stood up and he said to John, "John, I've asked David to give me a report on this." And John Payne says, "I'm the chairman." He says, "Let me finish." He says, "I'm appointing David as chief executive of Rangers." And there was a deadly hush and a lot of aggravation spilled out. But no very good ones, but I had a lot of words to put out to defend my position. I never asked for it. So I left that meeting as chief executive of Rangers and chief executive of the launch organisation. So when I'm going home the plane, I'm thinking, what the hell have you done now, David? You wanted progress, but you got back to progress. So I came back on the Monday, on the Sunday, and the Monday I said to Campbell Ogilvie, who, by the way, was a staunch supporter and he helped me a lot. He was really the Rangers for me. Yeah. He knew everything about Rangers, and I leaned a lot on him at that time. So I said, "Hey, can you arrange a board meeting for Tuesday at 10 o'clock?" He said, "Yep." He said, "Will I give the agenda?" I says, "No, just ask them to be there." So Tuesday at 10 o'clock went into the board meeting. And John Payne opened it as chairman, and he said, "I don't know what the agenda is." I said, "Okay, I've got the agenda here, so I just put it out." And there was only one line in the agenda. Positions on the board. And he said, "What's that?" I said, "Right, okay, I'll tell you, I'll explain to you." I said, "I want 3 resignations by 12 o'clock today, these 3. And I said, we accept that you're not going to be happy about this and you've tried your best for Rangers, but we want to take the club a whole different way." Because these were the people that when I went into the first board meeting said, "You're the boy that's been hanging about here. Is this why you've been hanging about?" And then I was accused of being a spy. I said, "I've never been a spy." I says, "I'm not here to play games either." Anyway, they said, "Well, why should we resign?" I said, "Because I just asked you." I said, "But you don't need to worry about it." But I said, "To keep it out of the papers," I says, "because if you don't resign today by 12 o'clock, because I said, I've got a lot of work to do. What I'm going to do is have an EGM in 28 days, and then I'll just vote you off." And they said, "You can't do that." I said, I can't, because I've got my name on 88% or 66% shares. So that'll happen in 28 days, but it's going to keep me back for what I want to do. Anyway, I got them. And Betty and I got on a plane at 2:00 that day and went down to Jersey to meet Lawrence before we went back to America. So he said, right, you've started. So he said, that's what you want? I said, yep. He said, well, what about the business plan? I said, I've got it here. He said, well, can I see it? I said, yeah. So I gave him it. And it was a simple business plan. We had to win the league in the first year. We had to have a cup. We had to have 2 rounds in Europe, and we had to have 42,000 bums in all the seats. And he says, oh, David, that's great. He says, why did you do all that? I said, well, if I put all that together and I've worked out all the figures, that would bring me in £5.5 million. He says, right. He said, so do you want me to? I said, no, I don't want you to do anything. I said, I don't want the money from Lawrence. I don't want the money from you. I said, I want to go to the bank and get £5.5 million based on my business plan. So he said, well, awful ambitious. I said, well, if we don't have ambition, but we were talking to you right at the very start before we came on air, that if you're going to sell something like a can of beans, you can advertise the can of beans and people can try it because they're only buying a can of beans. If you've got a big football club, you've got to have more ambition than that. The people are not coming for 2 reasons. One, they were still frightened after the disaster, which was 10 years ago at this time. And it says, there's nothing on the park. I said, so I've got to raise the money. And it's Rangers. I don't want any help from the Lawrence group. I'm going to raise the money. And we're going to put my idea of what Rangers should be on the park. And then we're going to say to the supporters, instead of saying to them, give us your money and maybe next year we'll get it right, I'm going to put it on, say, I've paid mine. You come and watch. He said, do you think it'll work? I said, I hope so. I said, because I'm going to put my neck in the blue for £5.5 million. He said, how are you going to take that to the bank? I said, that's where I'm going to get the money. He said, do you think you can sell it to them? I said, you gave me Rangers. Must be something right. I said, well, fair enough. So he said, but how are you going to get this all started? I said, well, I've got a bit of the plan I haven't told you yet. I'm going to get a new world-class player in a blue jersey, and I'm going to put him in eyebrows. I'm going to get a new manager, somebody that can bring that player into the club. I said, because I've looked for kind of manager I can get. He says, that means Wallace is gone. I says, oh, that goes without saying. I says, he had his day, but it's not now. It says, so how are you going to get these 2 people? I says, I'm only going to get one. He said, I said, I'm going to go and get Graham Souness. He said, do you know Graham Souness? I says, no, I've never met him. He says, so how are you going to get him? He says, I'm going to ask him if he wants to come to Rangers as a player manager. He said, but you're basing this all on getting him. I says, yeah. He said, well, what's the backup plan? I says, there isn't a backup plan. I said, I've made my mind up that he's coming. So he'll come. Okay, he said. We shook hands and he said, I will never question anything you do from now on. He says, but don't forget, you're on Lawrence. I said, could I forget? Said, would you let me forget? I said, no, don't you worry about that. So I came back and I went to see the bank and asked them for $5.5 million. And I showed them the business plan. And the chief in Scotland, the Royal Bank, he said, Davis, I said, well, I've got a backup plan for this. He says, okay, let me hear it. I says, well, I'm going to go and get Graham Souness and explain to him what's going to do with him. He says, I've got a backup plan. We paid for the shares. Got 5 people who I've talked to who will buy Lawrence shares off us if we fail. I said, I'm signing for this in my name, and I'll bring these people in, and you'll get your money back. They'll pay you off and pay Lawrence off. He said, have you got the ability to do that? I said, how do you mean ability to do it? He says, well, is that agreed with Lawrence? I said, Lawrence has given me carte blanche. I said, I'll get him his money and you'll get your money. So we shook hands. And I said, I phoned him up. It was his wife I got. And she said, he's not here, but he'll give you a ring back. So he did, about an hour later. And he says, who are you? Anyway, I said, I'm David Holmes. He says, how can I help? I'd like to offer you a job. And he said, job? He says, I've got a job. He said, I live out here in Italy. He says, what kind of job can you offer me? I said, a better one than your pal got. He says, what pal? I says, Kenny Douglas. I said, well, Liverpool made him their manager in Liverpool. I'll give you a bigger job than that. He said, a bigger job than Liverpool? I said, yeah. What's the job? I says, Glasgow Rangers. Well, a pregnant pause. I was hoping that's what I thought he'd maybe hung up. Because there was no noise at the other end of the phone. He says, you bloody kidding? Is this a joke or some kind? I says, no. Come here. This is the player manager. He said, I'll be in London next week because he'd be writing a book. I said, I'll meet you next week. So we met in a hotel in London. But it wasn't just it was in Mayfair. I mean, couldn't meet Graham in any place except Mayfair. The dearest place you can have a cup of coffee in your life. Anyway, we met him there. We shook hands. And I had Graham Souness. And the rest just history after that. And by the end of the season started. Within 4 weeks of giving them $5.5 million, I'd spent the whole bloody lot. Almost. And at the start of the season, Terry Butcher and Woods, Jimmy Nicholl, West, sorted all the players with better wages, and we went out on the field at Easter Road. 25, 30 minutes later, he's coming walking towards me, and I'm saying, well, that was bloody £5.5 million, and here he comes. So it was a kind of eye-opener for me. But by the end of the season, we had won the league, we had won a cup, we had played 2 rounds in Europe, and there was 42,000 seats full. And the bank got the £5.5 million back without. We broke even in that first year. And it's history. Anyway, how did I become chairman Rangers? I have no idea. I have no idea. Halfway through the season, there was we just won the League Cup, and there was an incident that took place, and Lawrence and John Payton. See eye to eye about, and either John Payton or me. That was as simple as that. And I became chairman the next day. It would be something I felt I had more scope as chief executive than chairman. But anyway, it was a PLC and it had to be dealt with that way. So I became chairman, and the people that knew me when I was at school, or when I was an apprentice joiner, or when I was a teacher, they keep on saying, "How the hell did you ever do that?" Well, the easy answer is, and I'm telling you the answer, I have no bloody idea, apart from what I told you. So, does that answer your first question?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that. So then you resisted a lot of opportunities to talk about your time at Rangers over the, as you said, 34 years since then. So what inspired you to write the book One Voice, and what inspired you also to use Stephen as your partner through the writing process?
Well, it started before when Steve wrote that. Betty, I had a lot of approaches to write a book, to tell my story, because when I left, it only took Murray and the papers to try and bury. I mean, I was away about 2 or 3 weeks, and the papers were saying how much Murray had brought to the club, bringing in Graham Souness and Derry Butcher, and filling all the seats, and I wasn't away even 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But I did not want to get involved, because if I'd got involved, I'd have brought the club into disrepute. And after having out real bad for Rangers, I didn't think it would do me any favours or anybody else any favours, starting a holy war. So I stepped away, and Betty was quite pleased, because she'd had enough of the press hanging about and taking photographs of us, and anyway, and everybody wanted me to, but that's still to come with the second book, though. But anyway, that's another story. Anyway, at that particular time, didn't want to write the book, because it was just going to cause trouble. And later on, Betty took a stroke, because I looked after her for 7 years, because I was not able to do that. But she was still against it. And then she said, "Well, you should try and write it." So I thought, "Great, well, it's time to tell my story. It's time that I answer all the questions about how did I become chairman? Why did I leave for 34 years? Of a young man I knew called Stephen, and asked that young man, could you help me do research for the book?" And he said yes. And I asked him, would you write the book? And there was a question mark. And he said yes. And that's why we got together. And without Stephen, it would never have been the book it is. I could have, there was other people wanted to write the book, like some McPherson and people like that. But they would never have told my story. This man told my story.
Yeah.
And Betty, just a couple of weeks before she died, sorry, Stephen had written first 2 paragraphs, and I read it to her. She was knocked out.
I was approached first, Gary, in it was October 2021, I think it was. Kind of came out of the blue. Obviously, I had, as you might know, I was obviously the Rangers news the whole time that David's involvement was there. I was kind of taken by surprise to hear from him again, but it was great. And we met one day. I thought we reconnected very quickly. I didn't take much convincing, none at all really. It was a project you really couldn't say no to, and it had always been in my mind that David's side of the story, had never been told, and he's explained the reasons why he didn't want to do that immediately afterwards. But I think a lot of Rangers fans, an older generation, will realise it. The younger generation of Rangers fans didn't realise the part that he played, and there was this narrative that David Murray was responsible for everything, the whole Souness era. So it was important from that perspective, I think, just as a pure historical context, to get it on record, just what David had done. So we sat down the first few meetings. I had some records. David had his own archives. But I mean, his recall of detail was phenomenal, and it was just an absolute pleasure. And I could tell right away that the content, the subject matter was going to be absolutely of a high quality. So I felt a bit under pressure to do it justice. But I think any writer or author will tell you that anything you do is only as good as the subject matter, and this subject matter was brilliant, and absolute joy to do it. We're really pleased with the final product, the response it's had from Rangers fans. An important story, and I'm glad it's out there. I'm just proud that I could play my part in it.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and there's some really key interviews in there. Of course, Graham Souness is prevalent through when or actually from before he joined until his time during and since. We get Terry Butcher, Jimmy Nicholl, Campbell Ogilvie, our key features. Was that intentional as the story was unfolding to have these key figures within the story?
Yeah, I think we didn't want it just to be a chronological, Rangers played so and so this day, and I know if he scored that. We wanted to get the background and dig into the detail, and you couldn't have done it without speaking to those people. And they were all key figures in different ways, and they were all absolutely great. They were all very enthusiastic to speak about it, all with the highest regard for David, as I think will come across. And in many ways, he changed their lives and careers in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think that adds to it. And I mean, even in the last stages of the books, if you read it, you touch with what David did with Falkirk. People like Jim Jeffries and Simon Stainwood, and they speak about him in the highest regard. And yeah, so I think that was an important part of it, and it definitely added to the way the book shaped out.
Yeah, and one of the key factors, of course, is the Graham Souness situation, or the Graham Souness involvement, and how it all came to pass. And one of the things that I didn't quite get from the book here, and that's not a criticism at all. I think there's always that element of leave the reader wanting a little bit more. But like, David, what was how did it first come to pass? You mentioned part of the selling was maybe giving him a little bit of a competitive edge with Kenny Dalglish and doing what he was doing. But like, how did the very first idea come into your head, and then how did it manifest itself to, I actually think I can make this work, and then you explain the details afterwards. But I'm very interested in the first inspiration.
Well, the thing was, I didn't think about. You see, when Lawrence said he wanted me to go and fix it, I'd never thought about that as the follow-up to what I had been doing to get him the shares that he wanted. I knew you had to get somebody to go in there, but I never thought, I mean, maybe it sounds naive, but Rangers was never a part of my involvement with the Lawrence group, apart from helped him do the things that he wanted to do for the stadium, but nothing else. And Betty and I were content to go and see Falkirk every second week and pay our money, and I mean, so when they asked me to go on the board, that was one thing. But when I went, if I didn't know what the problem was until I went on the board.
Yeah.
Then I saw the problem, and I mean, I thought about it a lot. How do you shake this? I mean, we're talking a world-class institution, and take it from doing nothing, being in the wilderness for 9 years, and make it come alive.
Yeah.
And the only way I could see that was that we had to give the Rangers supporters some excitement, okay, on the park, but we had to get them excited about what we were going to do on the park. And I thought, after the Christmas and New Year, and after having listened, I mean, some of the abuse I got from the board when I was appointed, well, in there about, I wrote them a wee memo just to say, as a manager, can we get into Europe next year? We've got these amount of games to play. And he went and he's put on the board and tried to make me a laughing stock. And I tell you something, I don't take a joke all that well. I mean, I'm going to tell you, I didn't treat it as a bloody joke.
Yeah.
And I dealt with it firmly, as you would expect. But then the realization came to me that if I'm going to make a mark, it's going to be a big mark. And I thought a lot about it. And Graham Souness was somebody I admired as a football supporter. Seeing what he did or was doing in England and watching him playing for Scotland, he was a winner, a born winner. Went to Italy as a 31-year-old and took over Italy as a superstar. And I'm thinking, that's what I need. So I made my mind up that it had to be a Graham Souness. Then I thought, well, I need to get a manager that's going to bring Graham Souness in. Jock Wallace couldn't have brought him in. Alec Ferguson wouldn't have brought him in. Jim McLean wouldn't have brought him in. And I'm thinking, where did I get this manager? And you know how I quoted it in the book, lateral thinking.
Yeah.
I studied a lot about management. And I loved studying about. I mean, I became an academic, being an apprentice joiner. I was soaked in getting things right and creating the right atmosphere to make a business work. We talked about this before we started the interview, about why did my business plan not go further? But anyway, we'll deal with that. But my business plan was Graham Souness and build everything around Graham Souness. But it had to be kept as a secret. When Rangers were trying to get a manager, when Jock Wallace was brought back, when they got rid of John Craig, that were picking the next manager, or you should get Jim McLean. You should interview Alex Ferguson, you do this, you do. And I'm thinking, they cannot pick the next Rangers manager. I've got to pick him. I've got to pick the man that I can work with and he can work with me. And someone that's going to sell what I want him to sell. The can of beans is one thing, but football, you've got to do it in the park. So, thinking about latterly, I thought, well, why not get him? You see, long before they've had directors of football, up to, if I could get Graham Souness, I'd have the world-class player, I'd have a manager, and I'd have a director of football, because I knew nothing about fees and what people were getting paid, but he did, because he was one of them.
Yeah.
So if I was going to get big players in, he would know what the value of the big players were, and he would know what they wanted to get paid. So I got a 3-in-1. And you know something I'm going to say right now. I've heard a lot of stories about Graham Souness. There's a lot of criticism for a lot of quarters. We never once discussed how much he was getting paid when we shook hands. It never came to the fore. He never put the gun to my head and said, I want. That never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And when he got the money, I had a business plan. And I told him what his budget was. And I told him that I would never interfere with the football side. But he had no right to try and interfere with the business side. That was mine. This was my business. It was my business to control. And he would get his budget, and he had to stay in that budget. I said, I've got £5.5 million. Spend it, and spend it well. You can spend the whole bloody lot. I said, but it's got to be that. And we don't go over the top and get in a lot. I said, I've got to break even this first year to prove people two things. One, that we've put it on the park. And two, we did it in a business-like fashion. And we're going to run this as a business. And I said, the first thing you do is, you tell me how you're going to get the centre of this team with a big spine that's going to be winners from you right down. So that was the plan. And that's why I got Graham Souness. And that's how I got him. And time I was there and he was there, we never once had an argument. Not once.
Yeah, it sounds a lot of the stories in the book that you ended up having a very, very strong working relationship, and you know, and dare I say it, a friendship as well. You know, times when he was having a hard time, that he would come to you in a bit of an emotional state, and then you would say, "Come in, sit down, let's have a talk about it. Here's the options," and it seemed to just work.
It did work. It was a great relationship. And well, you can have your say in that.
Yeah,
Well, you saw it.
yeah, I did see it, but I think Gary, that was the thing I meant to mention earlier. Even though I was there for that 5-year period, you know, was just lucky enough to be close to it. There were so many things speaking to David that I didn't know of at the time. You know, things that I don't think had come out, and some of those things you mentioned with Graham, you know, that he was close to leaving. You know, we had the run-ins with referees, and basically David kind of had to talk him down off the ledge, as it were, quite a few times. And I think it was very important, as was the fact, I think, and another thing that David should get credit for is bringing Walter Smith in, because he was such a good foil. Again, that was another thing that latterly I don't think people realised, that it was David that brought Walter in, and the whole dynamic of those three together, I think that was the key to the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's certainly it's kind of sprinkled through the book, and it's almost like a very subtle undertone in the book that there wasn't a panic around Graham, and you know, if he had an episode where something happened and he decided in a fit of temper or impetuousness that he would leave, that the plan was always for Walter to stay and
You
you know,
need
so
the
that
insurance.
probably provided peace of, yeah, exactly, peace of mind insurance there at the same time. So fast forwarding, I don't want to spoil everything in the book, of course, because we want people to read it, and I had such a good time reading it. I really did. And you know, you get to the point at the end of your reign, and you know that's kind of planned in. You have the business plan, as you mentioned there, and we'll get to the kind of latter part of that towards the end of the interview. But we have David Murray coming in. He wasn't the only one that was interested in buying Rangers, and there was another key figure in industry which we can let people read about in the book, which was fascinating. But then, you know, transitioning out of a role can be awkward, and sometimes transitioning into a role can be awkward as well. But the impression I got from the information that was shared, that it wasn't a very positive or productive transition relationship, and it seemed to just, the impression I got was it was kind of sour. You know, could you explain a wee bit more about how what that experience was like for you?
Yeah. Hi. What happened was, Lawrence and I had the 5-year plan, and I'm not into that. There was a 5-year plan, and I accepted that at the time. And I had made my mind up, it was 5 years, and that was it. But when we got to the second year, we lost the league. I felt it was because a broken leg that fell out the team. I think that was hiatus there. That was it. So it's the last year. Lawrence wanted to sell it at the end of the 4th year because he had started businesses. You're Canada, and you know what America's like.
Yeah.
The American dream is only for Americans. British people that go across there, they take their money off them,
Yeah.
and they took his money off him. And I make no bones about that. That's exactly what happened. And he wanted to get. I says, no, Lawrence. I said, look, the league in the first year were really in charge. And I said, if we leave now, it will just be another flash in the pan. Oh, Rangers come in 1 year. And there was a boy called McNee, a reporter, who was a nemesis of mine. And I hated him, really. And I think he didn't dislike me a bit. You know. But anyway, he used to, he was, you know, and I said, because one of the first time we won the League Cup against Celtic, after the game, they said I had to go and talk to the press. And I'm thinking, why? I said, I don't need it. No, 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 no. It's a part of the contract that you've got to go and talk to the press because you're the chairman. I said, well, nobody told me that. I said, I got paid. No, no, you've got to do that. So anyway, so I went in, and I was just waiting to start talking to him. And McD shouts out, this is just another false start with Rangers. You won the League Cup and then you get nothing else. You've done it all before. I said, excuse me. I said, I'll tell you what, clear. I said, we're going to win the league in the first year. And I just got up and walked out. You were still sitting there. I don't know what happened when I just walked out. And of course, there was a great hoo-ha about, where's you come? So I said, so I went down to the dressing room, and Graham says, what have you done? I says, I beg your pardon. He said, what have you done? I says, talking about, he says, you've told these animals that we're going to win the league. I says, yeah. I says, what's wrong with that? He says, you under any idea of the pressure you put me under? I said, you want to know what pressure is? Becoming chairman. And having spent £5.5 million. I brought all your pals in. That's pressure. I said, you get to go and play. I've got to watch. That's pressure. I said, so anyway, I said, when you came to see me about Terry Butcher, you said, if you get me Terry Butcher, I'll win the league. I says, well, I've stuck to my part of the bargain. You stick to yours. And he did.
Yeah.
But anyway, all these things add up. And I think what people, and Lawrence had missed it. When we got to the third year, I said, Lawrence, if we're going to have something in the history books that we turned Rangers round, we've got to win the league in the third year. We've got to say, no, the second year was the hiatus. This is us. We're here.
Yeah.
And that year, we won the league, and it was the first in the 9 in a row.
Yeah.
And people sometimes forget that. And we've got to the end of the 9 in a row. They still had 5 of my players there, and Walter Smith.
Yeah.
We're still there.
Yeah.
And that's what a business plan's all about. It's long term. When I signed, it was a 10-year signing. Brown, as a 10-year signing. I mean, when you think we paid 1.1 million for Goff,
Yeah.
cheap. If you write him off at £100,000 a year, pretty cheap. And he was still the captain of the team in 10 years. So that was the business plan. And we had my next 5-year business plan simpler than that. I was going to make him chief executive. Chris Smith was going to become the manager. Terry Butcher and Ray Wilkins were going to become first team coach. That was the business plan.
Yeah.
And I think that would have set the whole thing. And you're saying, why do other people not take it? Well, that's what I thought as well. And when the time came and people asked me to go, I didn't want to have anything else to do with football. I just knew that I had created a business plan that actually worked. And 34 years later, I was listening to, you call that lad used to play for Liverpool. He's a centre half.
Jimmy Carragher.
Carragher. I was listening to him as a pundit saying Liverpool had developed a whole new way of running a football club. They found out how much they were going to earn and they didn't spend any more. I had done that 34 years ago.
Yeah.
Not for Rangers and Falkirk and Dundee.
Yeah.
And it took them 34 years to waken up to it. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say how clever I am. I'm just thinking the business has got to be, football has got to be run as a business.
Yeah.
And the business plan was there. Yeah, and I was upset when I left. Yeah. And was it bad? Yeah, it was bad. They made me feel like an interloper. And Lynn got bullied by the new incoming chief executive.
Mm.
And when she came home one night, they were bullying her. I went in the next day, and he had an office in Ibrox at that time. I walked into his office and he says, have you got an appointment? I said, beg your pardon. He said, have you got an appointment? I said, I'm the chairman. I said, I'm the chairman. And I'll be the chairman until the end of this season. I said, because David Murray hasn't paid the money yet. I said, so don't you start telling me how to run a business. I said, now tell you something else. You picking my dog. You'll know what running me is. I said, so let's just make it clear. I said, you have no idea how to run a business. I said, we'll show you. I says, have they finished? I said, you'll last 6 months and then they'll kick you out. And I was wrong. I stayed 7 months. And that disappointed me a lot. But that was the trouble. They made it really, really nasty. I think if you go back to the last part in the book that this man wrote, that joke, and Diablo says one voice. No, there's one voice, because people had help. Nobody stood beside. And that hurt. So I was really upset. And I was offered to go back and sort out Falkirk. I went back, and one of the things that took me back was I wanted to prove to people that my business plan could work with money. I didn't have money, but I made a business plan. I found out how much we could. If I got it right, what could the crowd be? And I made that into a business plan. Year, because I backed the manager to the hill. They didn't want him in Falkirk. And to defend him, I didn't go into the press. I went and sat on every Falkirk supporters club and told them, and if you don't want to come, you'll stay away, because he's there. So I still feel that my business plan can work. And I would like this book to be a kind of textbook for anybody that wants to be interested in running a football club. Get it right at the start. Find out what you could earn to your best estimate, and then work within that. Because many clubs have gone down because they borrowed money, and you can't borrow money and win if you can't pay it back. So I'm talking a lot, and I do apologize.
Oh no, this is fantastic. I was going to ask, I was actually going to ask what's your biggest regret, but I don't think I want to ask that. What thing are you most proud of about your time with Rangers?
Bringing 42,000 people back. That times came again. Nation expelled from the club, from the league, put into the bottom tier. Home game against East Stirlingshire, 50,000. The people I brought back were still there. And what people don't understand is part of my time at Rangers was to bring them back and show them that loyalty is a two-way stretch. They're loyal to the club, but the club has got to be loyal to them. And you see, if you look at the revolution, it's been called the Murray Revolution, the Soonest Revolution. This was the Rangers Revolution. The revolution was about Lawrence Marlborough and what having the foresight to rebuild the stadium. The revolution was about my team, Betty, Lynn, Graham, Campbell, Stephen, the Doc, the kit man, bring stability to the park and winning. And the last part of the revolution was the 42,000 coming back because they believed what I said. That was the revolution. And that's something that must never be lost. That's why my book's there. It's our history is there. And it's the history that other clubs should read.
Mhm.
And there's a moral there that could be full. And I'm not looking for Emmy to say how clever I was. I wasn't clever. I was just common sense and doing what had to be done.
The challenge is that common sense isn't very common, as you most rightly know. So you've answered more questions than in the stories that you've told there than I was planning to ask today, and it's just been an amazing experience. Just a tidbit. I don't want to say like I'm a hero or I'm, anything special or anything, but I saved Lawrence Marlborough's life in 2015 in California. He came to the NARSA convention and he came up onto the stage and a fellow had already fallen off the back of the stage. It wasn't that high. It was like the tiered table. And this guy, I was talking to this guy, Charlie Davison from Oakville in Ontario, and then he disappeared. And I said, where did he go? And he fell down the back. So then Lawrence Marlborough came up on the stage. I said, it's really nice to meet you. This beautiful kind of white suit on, very distinctive. And I just put my hand on his back and I says, please don't take another step back. There's nothing behind you there. And he's like, oh, thanks very much for that. So that's my only contribution to the Rangers
Can I tell you
revolution that I can
Can I
give.
tell you a wee story that actually backs that up? What you tell it?
Story is this?
When we were in Glasgow, I almost fell off the back of the stage in Glasgow. If you hadn't have said, don't go back any further.
Oh, he said the book event, right enough. Yeah. So there you are.
I read that.
Repeating itself. Yeah, with a book
So-
event one night, and yeah, the stage wasn't the best, and David almost took a tumble. But yeah. So we've got something in common. We
Oh,
same. We
must be something to do with Rangers.
Figures
It
from
must
falling off
be.
stages. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your time. During as we advertise this podcast, I'll let people know how to get a hold of the book. And as you said, almost at the very end there, David, like this is a blueprint for the common sense approach to a business plan, intertwining the football aspect of it and giving a bit of a sense of how to navigate the thorny world of football with egos and personalities and a drive, to do what's sustainable for the particular football club. I would recommend genuinely anyone to read it. This is going to be one of these books genuinely that's on my bookshelf that I would go back to, because of the life lessons in there, the leadership lessons in there, the family camaraderie and such. It was just a great experience overall, and of course with it being Rangers, very, very close to my heart. So we'll let everyone know how to get that. You can just go to onevoice.co.uk and order your copy, and we'll put that in the blurb as well. But gents, I can't thank you enough for your time. Thank you very, very much for taking the time, and all the very best in the future with the book, and take care of yourselves.